This is the fourth video in a series of 5 dedicated to the creation of scatter and line plots in KIWI ExploreLive. In this video, we will cover the topic of the creation of central tendency lines. We'll use a simple PK dataset with 10 to 20 subjects. Each subject received a single dose, and data was collected fairly heavily between 0 and 48 hours. We have displayed the observation variable dv as a function of TSFD. To create central tendency lines, you need to go to the central tendency panel of the advanced setting tab. So central tendency is slightly different from the functionality of smooth lines obtaining the that you can create in the reference line value. Central tendency lines are based upon the data point, and the mean or the median of your actual data will be displayed or used to create the central tendency value, instead of, in the case of the smoothing line, it's some kind of dynamic averaging as the window of time interval goes from your minimum value to the maximum value. So to illustrate the concept of central tendency, I will also stratify the data by the dose variable. So we had 8 different doses in this data. And I'm going to start creating a central tendency line. So the most basic way of doing that is to set the central tendency to either a mean or median. I'm going to use median. So by default, you will create, or ExploreLive will create a line for each group of data defined by the line by field. So in addition to coloring by or symboling by the dose variable, I will also set dose as my line by variable. In this case, I obtain a line for each dose group. I may actually want to show that on the log scale, and you can see that instead of having a smooth line with a loss type of function, I'm actually connecting the median of each of my data points. So that creates some kind of a more zigzaggy line. And so by default, you only display the central tendency, but you can also decide to show variability around that central tendency. So you can decide to display the variability using bars or using a shaded area, so that this is a little bit busy, but you get the idea about maybe I can actually switch to a different variable, such as my sexf variable. So this is just creating one line for the data in the female subject, and another line for the subject that had the male subject. You can influence the range of the variability around your central tendency. So here I'm just displaying a 50% confidence interval, which may or may not be appropriate here. If you choose a mean instead of a median, you can still choose a design based upon central tendency and viability by area. And in this case, you can select whether the viability is represented by standard deviation or standard error. You can define how many standard error or standard deviation to apply around the mean. So the default is 1. You could go to a 1.6 or 2 or whatever makes sense to you. So this would, the higher the multiplicator, the larger the viability area. So this is the most simple way of applying the central tendency, which is based upon the same x-axis variable. And in our case, we had data that was really well behaved, where all the data points were obtained at the same time, which is typically not the case in phase 2 or phase 3 data. You tend to have actual time of sampling or sampling time that differ from one subject to the other. And in this case, you may need to use an alternative x-axis variable for processing your data into center. So typically what you have in your data is some form of nominal time. And you can use that alternative variable. In our case, the nominal time and the actual TSFD were exactly similar, so there's no real difference. Another way to provide an alternative way of bidding your data is to provide fixed intervals or boundaries for the x-axis. So if I provide something like 10, 20, oopsie, 10, well, no, I'm going to start at 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Now, the mean of the data within the 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20 will be computed, and the data will be joined by those intervals or those boundaries. So that's another way to bin data that doesn't have a nice, nicely behaved x-axis variable. So this covers the functionality related to central tendency. Additional functionality of the advanced setting tab are provided in other videos. Thank you.